So what is the formula for creating a great speaker? In my opinion, it's a combination of aesthetics, the enclosure options, if they give you all different color options, things like that, how it sounds, so we can measure that on axis, how it looks as far as the directivity index, the in-room response, and I think that a great speaker should also be relatively affordable. I understand that what some people might consider affordable might be expensive for others. Another aspect is I think that a great speaker should be designed by somebody who is respected and who has a history of creating great speakers, and I think that these guys at Philharmonic check all those boxes. For full disclosure, these were sent to me by someone who owns these speakers, so thanks to them for sending these out. One thing that I found was kind of interesting was that on the box it says Alexisonus, not Philharmonic, and so that was kind of interesting. I guess somebody has kind of taken over those duties. I don't know the exact details, but it does have that on the actual speaker itself. So these are the most beautiful looking speakers and the nicest finish that I've seen as far as speakers that I've reviewed here at my house. They have a 12-layer piano gloss finish, and it just, ooh, it looks so nice. If you go on their website, you'll see that they have different finishes. This one here is the curved rosewood. You can choose to have an enclosure that has a kind of curve to the back. That's what I like. I'm a fan of that. Or you can get one that's a little bit less and is rectangular in shape. Some people think that the curved shape does help with cabinet resonances. I have not had a chance to test that. One thing that I haven't seen is this white woofer. I think it looks really cool. On the back, you'll see a large port with some nice terminals. And I was surprised to see that it actually has magnetic grills. It's important to know that they have variations of this particular BMR design. The older models used a 7-inch woofer. This one is a new 6-inch woofer, and they've changed the RAL ribbon tweeter and made some modifications, and therefore they had to change the crossover components also. From my understanding, the BMR driver has stayed the same. I wanted to explain that because you may see some differences in my measurements compared to some from my buddy Erin's. He's measured the V1 as well as the V2. This is actually a different version that has a slightly different response, and I've confirmed with the designer Dennis Murphy himself. So the drivers are very nice drivers. The woofer here is made by SB Acoustics. They're known for making good quality components, and it's a theme here where this speaker uses nice components throughout. An exception might be the BMR driver, which you can find relatively cheap. But it's interesting that they use this. They wanted to tie in the sound of the RAL ribbon tweeter, which is not typically used, and combine it with the sound of the woofer, and they needed that BMR driver in between acting as a mid-range. I also have experience using another BMR driver. It's a very interesting type of driver. I'll leave a link to that up here. So I tested these in an untreated living room, and I just want to give my listening impressions with a single speaker first. So with one speaker, the dispersion pattern, which is very wide on this, is very obvious. It kind of reminds me of a speaker I reviewed in the SingCell Alpha, which is kind of an omnidirectional speaker. It wasn't exactly like that, but it kind of reminded me of it, where I could move side to side and the sound didn't really change very much. It has very good bass response and decent extension considering the size of it. It's not the smallest bookshelf speaker. It's more like a floor standing speaker. And so you do expect a little bit more bass extension. I think I expected a decent amount, but I still was pleasantly surprised. The tonal balance out of the box is very pleasing, so somebody who's using this in a 2-channel setup, I think would be pretty happy out of the box. I do wish that the highs were a little bit more prominent. That's one of the changes with the new tweeter and the new crossover design. Compared to the older one, it just seems like these have a lower treble response, and you can see that from the graphs itself. I don't think anybody would listen to these and say that they're fatiguing. It's actually the opposite. They're more laid back. Typically, if you're near a speaker and you move back from it, you'll notice a change in the response, the tonal response, but also the change in level. The further you get back, the lower the level. And I noticed with these, for some reason, seem to have less of a change. I think it has to do with the dispersion pattern where it does have more interaction with the room. So as I went back further, I noticed the volume didn't change as much as I am used to with the other speakers that I had. I did notice that when I was doing DSP that the level and distance had to be more precise. So if you don't get those perfect, it kind of changes the center image and the spatial balance. But when you do have those set, when you're watching a movie, being off center is not so bad with these, just because the dispersion pattern is so wide that you can move side to side, and the center image is it's a wider center image, right? So it's not so pinpoint, and you can move side to side, you can be slightly off center, and it still gives you a decent center image. When I talked to Dennis Murphy, he explained that he wanted a speaker that could properly produce the sounds of a violin because he was very familiar with that. And the thing with real instruments is the dispersion pattern isn't so directional, it's much wider. And that's why he designed the speaker this way. So of course I had to try it with some violin recordings, and the wide radiation pattern really did make that sound more realistic, and it was almost an emotional experience. I compared it back and forth with the Monolith T6s that I had here previously, and definitely it was noticeable. These speakers seem to do really well with live recordings. I had a friend with the BMRs who was always raving about them. He knows who he is, and he told me about this track called Jazz Variants by Ozone Percussion Group. Not something I would typically listen to, but when you listen to that particular track, it really shows off the range and the positive characteristics of the speaker. There's a lot of bass notes, there's a lot of percussions, and basically you just got to test out that track, see how it sounds with your speakers. Just know that it sounds awesome with these speakers. Again, the treble is clear without being annoying, and the transient response of the tweeter seems what I could just call snappy. I don't like to do a lot of subjective stuff, but that's what I wrote down. And the difference between this type of raw ribbon tweeter and a typical dome tweeter or something like that is that the apparent source width seems wider, right? So you can imagine that the tweeter typically sounds like, okay, that's the tweeter. I can pinpoint where the tweeter is. This one sounds like there's just like a larger tweeter. Because of that, it made it harder to pinpoint exactly where the sound was coming from. Some people might see that as a con, but in my opinion, it is just a trade-off. It's just characteristic of these speakers, and I actually like it. So that was my testing with a single speaker. When I tested out two speakers, what I noticed was that it was a wider soundstage. I tested out the song Oye Como Va by Santana, and it just sounded almost like panoramic. What I explained to somebody was it was the difference between watching something on a 65-inch TV where everything is very crystal clear and precise, and this is like watching on a 150-inch projector where everything is just wider. The soundstage is wider. It was almost as if I had front wide speakers, and because the image was so big, it's almost like I could pinpoint all of the things more clearly because they were more separated and spread out. I did notice that I had to be further back from the speakers to get a better sound because it was really interacting with the sidewalls because of the wide dispersion pattern. So by staying too close, I wasn't getting that sidewall reflection. I was getting more of the direct sound. And I think part of the design is to include the sidewall reflections. I also experienced more 3D depth, and it kind of makes sense if you consider how imaging works. You have two speakers, and a center image happens because of the sound from the two direct speakers. If you consider that this is interacting with the sidewalls, now the sound source is not just the speaker itself, but it's the speaker and the sidewall, meaning if you have sidewalls, which I assume are wider, what happens is the center image is in the center of kind of like where the sidewall reflections are, right? So if the speakers are over here and the sidewalls are over here, the center image is kind of brought forward because it sounds like it's between those two. Does that make sense? So this video is not sponsored by Philharmonic, but it is sponsored by the Spatial Audio Calibration Toolkit. That's a project that I have with Technodad, and we created a disc that allows you to test your Dolby Atmos system. It's also sponsored by my Magic Bean software, which is intended to find the true target response of the speakers in your room at your listening position. I'll leave a link down below to both. So I did use Magic Beans to EQ these speakers, and what it did was it raised the treble a slight amount, but over a wide range, and it made the sound just more detailed and lively, and it sounded better to me, and I think a lot of people would agree that it does sound better with EQ. Now, the reason I specifically sought out these speakers is because the directivity response was so smooth. I sought out over 1,000 speakers and I looked at the response of all of them, and I tried to find some in different categories that had very good directivity index because that lets you know how EQable it is. In the low end, I found the Polk XT20 to be very good. These are a step up at around $2,000. That's much more expensive than the $250 a pair Polks, but they also are significantly better. Having a good directivity means that they take extremely well to EQ, and that's not just theoretically. I'm talking about in real world. I did EQ them, and it sounds native to the speaker. A lot of times you'll EQ a speaker and you're kind of pushing it to its limits, and maybe it measures better, but you listen to it, you're like, it doesn't sound like it really wants to do that. These are the opposite. When you EQ them, it just sounds like they were made like that. I ended up watching some movies with no sub, and the bass extension really surprised me watching a movie. I did have to check to see if the subs were on. I know a lot of people say that, but it's true. I really did do that. Their site states that it can get down to 34 hertz in room. For my measurements, I found that that is true, as well as my listening impressions. The next thing I wanted to try is how they sounded with subs, considering they already have good bass, and definitely using subs and using a crossover on these so that they don't have to play those extreme low notes definitely helps them play louder. Overall, the sound with the subs was just a very pleasing sound. I would imagine that somebody who would use these in a 2-channel setup with subwoofers would be extremely happy. So overall, would I recommend these? Definitely yes. I'm gonna go ahead and put them on my speaker leaderboard, and go and check it out at speakerleaderboard.com. I'll leave a link down below to that. So overall, I can say if you're looking for a speaker in this price range around $2,000, it's hard to find something that competes with this. I think you might find some well-measuring speakers from Kef that look maybe a little bit more modern. Maybe that might fit your decor a little bit better. But for my style, these look extremely high-end. I've been to high-end trade shows where I see extremely expensive speakers, and these look like they fit right in with those, right? The cabinet, everything about it just looks high-end, and I am very happy that they can do this at the $2,000 a pair price range. I know this is a raving review, but what can I do? I have to be honest about my feelings about this speaker. I really love them. So let me know if you have these Philharmonic BMRs, what do you think about them? I know there are a lot of fans out there, and I see why. If you have any questions or if you don't agree, leave them in the comments below and let's have a discussion. Anyway, thanks for watching the video. If you liked it, make sure to like, subscribe, ring the bell to be notified when I upload new videos, and watch these other videos that are similar. Thanks for watching.